And to complete the most significant news for this day, Y News continues. Here are the top stories. Authorities are now pursuing the perpetrators behind the deadly blast in a church in Jolo on Sunday. The military and police have identified the suspects as members of the Abu Sayyaf-affiliated group called Ajang, who is known for kidnapping, liquidation of soldiers, police and civilians, among other crimes in Sulu. CCTV footage recovered from establishments near the blast site showed 3 of the bombing suspects. One was identified as alias Kamah, a brother of ASG sub-leader Suraka Igog, who was killed in a clash with the military. Authorities noted that alias Kamah is a skilled bomb maker, has manifested from the fragments recovered from the blast site. Meanwhile, the military is appealing to residents in Sulu not to cover up for the suspects who are also believed to be residing in the area.
Sila talaga nakita yung pagpipik sa cellphone, no, sakto sa pagsabog. And at the same time, 100% ang identification. Kilala. Hindi yan bago, hindi yan iba dyan sa lugar. Ang problema, hindi pa tinuturo.
President Rodrigo Duterte believes that 2 suicide bombers were responsible for the deadly blast in a Roman Catholic church in Jolo, Sulu last Sunday. Duterte made the statement on the sidelines of the groundbreaking of the new site of San Lorenzo Ruiz General Hospital in Malabon City earlier. The president to this conclusion after receiving information that a female blew up herself inside the church while a male had himself blown up outside the cathedral. The chief executive also stands firm that there was no security lapses that led to the bombings.
Walang lapses doon because the other bomber was outside. There was no reason for him to be freeze. Either he was just passing by before blowing himself up. Ang problema yan kasi yung babae was wearing a cross pa. Malaking cross sa dibdib niya, so who'd ever think.
The president has ordered the military to crush Abu Sayyaf group, who is believed to be behind the Jolo bombings, as well as other enemies of the state. Meanwhile, the Senate resumes its deliberations on the proposal seeking to double cigarette taxes to help curb smoking and raise additional revenue for government. The bill seeks to increase the excise tax on tobacco to 60 pesos per pack from the current 35 pesos. The Department of Finance, or DOF, and the Department of Health are pushing for the passage of the said bill, saying this will help in funding government programs such as the universal health care. The universal health care law would need an approximately 40 billion pesos for its implementation this year.
The government is projected to generate a total additional revenue of 316 billion by 2022 compared to just 72 billion in the House-approved bill. The total difference is 244 billion, which might undermine the effective implementation of the UHC.
DOF proposed rate will avert approximately 713,000 deaths and will result in 3.2 million quitters in adults.
Other Sintax supporters are calling for 90 pesos imposition of excise tax, but groups of tobacco farmers from Ilocos region are opposing the bill as this may threaten their livelihoods. In other news, a psychology expert states that minors may be susceptible to experiencing trauma when placed under intervention programs or transferred to Pag-asa youth shelters after committing offenses. Psychologist Dr. Camille Garcia explains there is a huge possibility that these children may experience depression when they are placed far away from their families. Garcia's comments comes after the lower house approved a proposal seeking to lower the minimum age of responsibility to 12. Arrested children in conflict with the law will also be placed in shelters or agricultural centers where they can be trained to become productive as part of the intervention program. Based on the data compiled by the Commission on Human Rights, only 8 of the 63 Pag-asa youth shelters in the country are accredited by the Department of Social Welfare and Development due to lack of facilities.
They will be placed in a temporary shelter without the parents. Kung sanay sila na kasama ang isang ate, magulang, or lola habang natutulog or nandun sa parang alam nila, hindi nila bahay yun eh. And how secure is the place na supposed to be sinasabi nilang temporary shelter na makakatulong dapat? What are the activities?
The Commission on Elections admits that their timetable for the printing of the ballots for the May midterm elections is getting tight. According to COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez, they are still waiting for the complete list of official candidates to come out. But Jimenez assures they will not hasten the printing of the ballots to be used in the coming elections, as they will even run out of time if they will already start the printing only to have major changes in the end.
The timetable is getting tight. Every day that we wait, we are cutting down our buffer, and we expect that will, of course, exert pressure on the process. Our people are at the NPO almost 24 hours a day now, moving things along, making sure that when we do get to start the printing of the national and local election ballots, that everything will go smoothly with a minimum of disruption.
15 factories in Bulacan are facing closure for pumping wastewater directly to river estuaries that link to Manila Bay. In a report released by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, a cease and desist order has been issued to 12 leather and tannery firms in the towns of Marilao and Mekawayan. The said establishments were accused of violating the Clean Water Act for not having their prospective water treatment facilities and environmental compliance certificate. The said factories were also observed discharging dark and chemically contaminated wastewater that flows directly to Manila Bay.
Pag tayo, saglit lang tayo, masakit na sa dibdib, no? Nakakasulasok na yung amoy. Kung yung mga nasa paligid, lalo pa na may exposure. And I think this is one of the reasons why may complaint dati, pero nag-stop sila and then nag-resurface na naman yung operation nila.
And for the news abroad, here's Kath Dumaraos live from Bangkok, Thailand. Kath, good evening.
Good evening, William. Tensions between Beijing and Washington further escalate after the U.S. charged China's HUAWEI with bank fraud and stealing of trade secrets. But China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology calls the charges unfair, immoral, and just part of a U.S. plot to suppress the success of Chinese firms. Beverly Saison tells us why.
Company Limited is chief financial officer and 2 affiliates with bank and wire fraud to violate sanctions against Iran in a case that has added to tensions with Beijing. In a 13-count indictment, the Justice Department said HUAWEI misled a global bank and U.S. authorities about its relationship with subsidiaries Skycom Tech and HUAWEI Device USA Incorporated in order to conduct business in Iran.
By claiming that Skycom was a separate company and not an affiliate of HUAWEI, which it actually controlled, HUAWEI allegedly asserted that all of its Iranian business was in compliance with the American sanctions. These alleged false claims led banks to do business with the company and therefore to unknowingly violate our laws.
In a separate case, the Justice Department also accused HUAWEI of stealing trade secrets, wire fraud, and obstructing justice for allegedly stealing robotic technology from carrier T-Mobile US Incorporated to test smartphones' durability. T-Mobile had accused HUAWEI of stealing the technology called TAPI, which mimicked human fingers and was used to test smartphones. HUAWEI has said that the 2 companies settled their disputes in 2017.
According to the indictment, in 2012, HUAWEI began a concerted effort to steal information about a robot that T-Mobile used to test mobile phones. In an effort to build their own robot, HUAWEI's engineers allegedly violated confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements with T-Mobile by secretly taking photos of the robot, measuring it, and even stealing a piece of it.
Meanwhile, a spokesman at China's Industry and Information Technology Ministry said Tuesday that the U.S. government indictment against Huawei is unfair and immoral. Director General of China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, Wen Ku, expressed concerns about the charges and then characterized the actions as part of a U.S. plot to suppress the success of Chinese firms.
Just as the Foreign Ministry said, with no evidence, they're using their state power to discredit and attack designated companies. This sort of behavior is unfair and immoral. As a department responsible for this industry, we consistently encourage China's companies to act in accordance with international rules and market principles and develop foreign economic cooperation on the basis of abiding by local laws.
Huawei said in a statement provided to CNBC that it was disappointed to learn of the charges brought against the company today. The company denies its subsidiary or affiliate have committed any of the asserted violations of the U.S. law set forth in each of the indictments, is not aware of any wrongdoings by Ms. Meng, and believes the U.S. courts will ultimately reach the same conclusion. The charges add pressure on Huawei, the world's biggest telecommunications equipment maker, from the U.S. government, which is trying to prevent American companies from buying Huawei routers and switches and pressing allies to do the same. Beverly Saison, UNTV News and Rescue, USA.
The United States has imposed sanctions on Venezuela's state-owned oil firm PDVSA and urged the country's military to accept a peaceful transfer of power. Venezuela is heavily reliant on the U.S. for its oil revenue, sending 41% of its oil exports there, while it remains in the top 4 crude oil suppliers to the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said the US's move would no longer allow President Nicolas Maduro and his allies to loot the assets of the Venezuelan people. Efforts by the opposition to unseat Maduro have increased in recent days. The U.S. and more than 20 countries have recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as interim president. Maduro later announced he had told PDVSA to launch political and legal action in U.S. and international courts to protect its U.S. subsidiary Citgo. Calls to hold the Brazilian firm iron ore miner Vale strongly responsible mount as death toll from the mining disaster hits 65. Meanwhile, at least 3 people were killed after a rare tornado hits Havana in Cuba. This report tells us why.
In Brazil, grief over the hundreds of Brazilians feared killed in last week's mining disaster has quickly hardened into anger as victims' families and politicians say iron ore miner Vale and regulators have learned nothing from the recent past. Protesters gathered outside the offices of Vale in Rio de Janeiro on Monday, holding signs reading, "It was not an accident, it was a crime," and "Killer Vale." Meanwhile, on Monday, firefighters in the state of Minas Gerais had confirmed more than 60 people dead in Friday's disaster. Nearly 300 other people are unaccounted for, and officials said it was unlikely that any would be found alive. Brazil's top prosecutor Raquel Dodge said the company should be held strongly responsible and criminally prosecuted. Executives could also be personally held responsible, she said. Brazil's Vice President Hamilton Mourão, who is acting president since Monday morning when Jair Bolsonaro underwent surgery, also said the government needs to punish those responsible for the dam disaster. In Cuba, residents in Havana were surprised on Monday to see a car embedded into a building after being lifted up by strong winds following a freak tornado that ripped through the city overnight. At least 3 were reported dead, over 170 injured after a rare tornado lashed a number of working-class districts of Havana late Sunday night. Forecasters warned residents in western Cuba that an approaching cold front from the north and winds from the south would create high winds, thunderstorms, and heavy rainfall in the area. And in Australia, Firefighters battled bushfires in the Australian state of Tasmania with 10 emergency warnings issued for the state, as hundreds of residents were told to evacuate on Tuesday. Tents and camper vans were set up at an evacuation center for residents leaving their homes in the Huon Valley. Family pets were housed in outbuildings and monitored by local veterinarians for heat stress. Residents were warned to expect the arid conditions to continue with no rain predicted for the next few weeks. In Victoria, a water-bombing helicopter crashed into a dam while refilling as firefighters combated fires in the eastern part of the state. The two pilots and engineer on board escaped the crash with minor injuries. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau is investigating the cause of the crash. Kat Dumaraos, UNTV News and Rescue.
And those are the news from the other parts of the globe. Back to you, William.
Thank you very much, Kath Dumaraos, reporting live from Bangkok, Thailand. "70 pilots and thousands of spectators from different nations head to Swiss Alps as the 41st edition of the Hot Air Balloon Festival kicks off. Meanwhile, over 90 puppies from shelters around the United States hit the field for this year's Puppy Bowl. Abby Valdez tells us why.
For the 15th year in a row, Team Ruff and Team Fluff went head-to-head at the Puppy Bowl. This year, 93 dogs from 50 shelters around the country competed in the game, which promotes pet adoption. Highlights of the game include the Lombardy Trophy, a kiss cam, the kitty halftime show, and backup refer Shirley the Sloth. The special 2-hour event runs against the traditional Super Bowl on February 3 on U.S. network Animal Planet. Since its inception, over 500 puppies have been featured in the annual show. The Teddy Bears of Paris departed in style on Saturday with a farewell party that featured music and dancing at the 13th Arrondissement's Town Hall. More than 100 people came to say goodbye to the bears who are now going into winter hibernation, according to local resident Philip, who organized the initiative, which saw giant bears appear in shops, restaurants, and terraces in November 2018. The 160 bears are slated to make a comeback in the spring and possibly in greater numbers. The annual Hot Air Balloon Festival kicks off on Saturday in the Swiss town of Châteaudet for its 41st edition, bringing together 70 pilots from 15 different countries. The festival, created in 1979, features hot air balloons in special shapes, air displays, expositions, a night show, and other activities for families. Between 20,000 and 40,000 are expected to attend during this 9 days long event, according to the organizers. Châteaudet and hot air balloons have, for a long time, a history. In 1999, Bertrand Piccard and Brian Jones left from the Swiss town with the Breitling Orbiter to do the first tour of the world in a hot air balloon. This year, a special flight has been organized to celebrate the 20th anniversary of their adventure, said Gittaz. Abby Valdez, UNTV News and Rescue, USA.
And those are the reasons behind the news, January 29, 2019. On behalf of Rheena, Villamor-Camara, and Angelo Diego Castro III, I am William Thio, because we need to know. We will always ask why. Good evening.
UNTV, your public service channel.